Peppery. Yeah, so ready?
Hey, hey, hey. What's happening now? Yeah, remember that show, What's Happening? They had D, Raj, Dwayne. He's the one who used to say, hey, hey, hey. He was cute. And then Rerun. And it's funny that they named it What's Happening Now. Because that was the second part. Remember, first I think it was just What's Happening. And then the second part was What's Happening Now. But Rerun is, I think all that's code, honestly. Um, I see layers in everything. So sometimes I'm putting these connections together. So what's happening now is I'm getting a lot of subscribers and they're asking me questions about like the origin of this book and where did it come from. So I'm going to do this whole video about these little footnotes and try to bring you guys into a better understanding of how we got our hands on these texts. Okay. So this is in the beginning of the Holy Megillah. It's copyrighted 1997. The Reverend David, his nickname is Day Alexander Owen. So it's David Alexander Owen, also known as Day of Greenleaf, is the legal copyright owner and publisher of the Holy Megillah, Nasarean Bible of the Essene Way. This title is so important, and we're going to get to it, why you have to say it like that, because there's a lot of Essenes out there. And Essene means healer. So this was at first, it was like copy internet warning. They didn't want, so me sharing this on the internet, I hope I'm not breaking any of their rules. But see, it says our church believes that the last day computer and internet technology will be used to control millions of human minds, and we do not want our sacred scriptures on the internet. And we expect our choice in this regard to be honored. So I don't even know if I'm supposed to be sharing this like this on the internet because you guys know how crafty people are. But there's a hard copy out there, so you don't have to rely on this internet version. You could get your hands on it. Um, See, you may write the copyright owner at this address to get you a copy of yours. So, the source of this Bible is God and Goddess. Yes, there were human beings involved in the process, but the ultimate source of this Bible is God and Goddess. We wish to acknowledge that the long line of men and women who have served our God and Goddess by preserving and passing on the teachings herein recorded, their loving work and personal sacrifice has made it possible for the current generation to receive and enjoy these ancient yet timeless teachings. The Nasarean Essene teachings have long been suppressed by the worldly powers, and thousands of men and women have lost their physical lives in the effort to preserve these teachings for our generation. Our gratitude to our Nasarean forefathers and foremothers is immense. This Bible would not exist were it not for those dear ones. All right, so more than one person in our generation was involved in the preparation of this manuscript. None wished to receive personal acknowledgement. Spiritually, that sort of acknowledgement does not feel appropriate. The primary translator to the scroll was simply a servant of his teacher, and his teacher preferred no personal acknowledgement. Also, each person involved in this project, which includes various specialists in ancient languages, graphic artists, and others, is fully aware that the hounds of hell will attack anyone associated with this project. And though some among us would happily confront their negative energy, our guidance from the chain of command which we serve, the source of which is God and Goddess, is not to do so. Rather, our strategy is as follows. We will distribute copies of this Bible all over the world. All right. And many will oppose it, most will ignore it, and some will love it. It is for the latter group that these teachings have been preserved. Exactly how they've been preserved, where they were hidden, who hid them, how the current translation team accessed them. Our oath demands we remain silent on these questions, and so we will. So our silence is in this regard will cause some to mock, However, the Holy Spirit has informed us that she herself will reveal the authenticity of this manuscript to each soul who has eyes to see and ears to hear. And they who mock this Bible have neither. The Holy Spirit has told us that the following will happen. Though many will mock or ignore this Bible, some will receive it and rally around it. Over the years, the numbers of those who receive the Bible will grow and become a flock, awaiting the return of the two good shepherds, the Lord Christ and the Lady Christ. And that flock will prepare the way for the coming of the Lord and Lady in person. And then this world shall again become a garden paradise. Mock or receive, doubt or believe, we are instructed by the Holy Spirit to offer no proof of evidence or explanation other than her testimony within the hearts of the reader. Yea, this is a part of the Universal Mystery School, and each reader is hereby enrolled. So something happened to me too when I first was reading this book. When I first found it, I don't think I slept. I don't think I slept for like 9 days. I'm not even gonna lie. And I read so much, and I was having these heart palpitations that like the third or fourth day, I said, okay, maybe I need to check my blood pressure. I was like, something's going wrong because I kept having these, like my heart was skipping a beat. And then I took a break for a couple hours, and I went back and it said the same thing in the text, that the Holy Spirit bears witness in the heart of the reader. She is the one who was making my heart have these, it says, we were instructed by the Holy Spirit to offer no proof or evidence or explanation other than her testimony within the heart of the reader. And that blew my mind there, because I didn't read this first part. You know, when I found this, I went straight to the Adam and Eve story. I went to like, I didn't start from the beginning. I went all over. I was reading about Moses first, I think. But this happened to me like the third day of me reading this book. And then after I finally got to the part in the actual text where it says this, that the Holy Spirit is going to be the one that bears witness in your heart, then my heart stopped doing that. When I realized, so at first I was scared, but yeah. So, all right, this is just in the front of the book. Now, there is some stuff in the back. This is him, David Day, the translator, the authorized. This is the author of the Holy Megillah. Now, he's the authorized translator, okay? It says, Dave Greenleaf at age 17 as a high school student, 1 month before meeting the Essene teacher, Malachi of Alexandria, okay? And beginning what is now nearly 5 decades of dedicated study and practice to the Essene teaching. So that's him at 17 when he met this guy, right? Now, this is in the back, though. And this is the story about how he met him. Oh, no. Sorry, wrong one. Here it is. So this video might get it'll get a little longer, but it's an informational video on the Holy Megillah and where all of these stories have been coming from. So I hope you guys stick with it till the end. I'm not going to read everything because it's a lot. I mean, he really tells the complete story. My international spiritual training began when I was 17. One night, I was camping in the mountains behind my home. Instead of sleep for much of the night, I laid awake, contemplating the seemingly infinite canopy of luminous stars. Awestruck within myself, I exclaimed, "What an incredible vast universe!" As I lay there in rapture. Many profound questions of philosophic and religious significance impinged upon my consciousness. The chief question, the one that most thoroughly occupied my consciousness, was, who am I? I pondered that question for several hours. I was unable to satisfactorily answer it. Was I a soul or just a body or with a brain? In prayer, I asked Jesus to help me answer the question. Then I fell asleep. The very next day, Jesus sent someone to help me discover the answer to that question. Jesus sent the Holy One destined to train me for my life work. I met my teacher on the freeway. I was driving my car This is that 17-year-old kid talking, David Day. Okay. I was driving my car and I saw him sitting in the lotus position, the lotus posture on the side of the freeway ramp. He did not have his thumb out, but I assumed that he was hitchhiking. At this point in my life, I had never picked up a hitchhiker. I was afraid to, due to prudent parental warnings, but something about this particular hitchhiker seemed different. He seemed safe. His eyes were soft and gentle, and on the front of his white tunic were the words, "Be kind to animals, don't eat them." I figured that an old man who would not hurt an animal would not hurt me. I pulled over. The hitchhiker climbed into my car. He said, "Thanks, brother." The way he spoke the word brother, I knew he actually meant it. I asked, "If you were hitchhiking, why didn't you have your thumb out?" His answer seemed rather mysterious, "Because I was waiting for you." It was obvious that this man was some sort of sage. His white beard nearly reached his waist, prayer beads hung from his neck, and in his hand he cradled a spiritual book as if it were a precious jewel. But it was not the long beard, prayer beads, or spiritual book that caused me to conclude that this man was a sage. It was his aura of holiness. He actually radiated peace. He had a glow about him. Um, You have seen those old paintings of saints with golden halos around their neck. Those halos are not only symbolic of holiness, they are the spiritual light, the nimbus that radiates from such saints. As I looked at as I looked at this holy hitchhiker, I sensed a subtle light emanating from him. I asked, "Where should I drop you off?" He replied, "I am going to a vegetarian restaurant in Al Cajon." I was 17 at the time and not yet a vegetarian. And so I asked him, "Does vegetarian food taste good?" He laughed a deep belly laugh, and said, "It tastes much better than the carcass of a murdered cow." He issued an invitation, "Come to the restaurant with me and I will buy you lunch. You can judge the taste of vegetarian food for yourself." Pleased at the prospect of continuing our conversation, I said, "Sure." For lunch, I ordered a vegetarian version of a hamburger, a grain patty called a sun burger, and I had to admit it did taste better than the body of a dead cow. But even better than the food was the conversation. Every word this man spoke had the proverbial ring of truth. I asked him about the spiritual books he was carrying. He said, "It is an ancient manuscript that includes many teachings of Jesus that have long been suppressed by his enemies." And then I remember the words of prophecy that Jesus had spoken to me when I was 8. So this guy David was spiritual his whole life. He said he had a dream or a vision of Jesus when he was 8. I think it's earlier in the thing, but he says, this is what he said: "You shall do a special work for me indeed. You shall be a bright sun by which my true teachings shall be illuminated. You will cast light on teachings of mine long suppressed by the merchants of death. Your life will be a blessing to many beings, human and non-human alike. But first you must be trained. When the time is right, I will send a Holy One to train you. You will know him when you see him. The eyes are the windows of the soul, and his eyes will reveal a gentle soul. He will radiate peace." So this was something that happened to David Day when he was little. He was 8 years old, and he had a dream. He said he was watching the Christmas. It was Christmas time, and they were watching the crucifixion and stuff. And that night, he was so upset that they had killed Jesus, and so he just went to bed. He didn't even watch the end of it. But he, in that night when he was 8 years old, that's when he had this thing. He just quoted, all right, that Jesus came to him and told him he was going to do a special work. So as he's sitting there in the vegetarian restaurant with this hitchhiker he picked up, he realizes that he was eating lunch with the Holy One sent by Jesus to train him and to reveal his long suppressed teachings. I asked him what teachings of Jesus were suppressed by his enemies. He smiled and said, "Three of the chief doctrines of Jesus that have been suppressed by his enemies are vegetarianism, reincarnation, and the female aspect of God." He said the whole list of suppressed teachings is much longer. He was very elderly, so I doubted that he still had any sort of job, but I wondered what had been his life path. So I asked, "What's your occupation?" He said that he still earns a few dollars doing carpentry, but that was not his true occupation. When he told me his true occupation, I thought he was joking. He said, "I help people find their way home." Later, later that day, I learned that he was not joking. All right, so we're at 16 minutes, and normally I would end this, but this is for my new subscribers that want to know, and for my old subscribers and anybody who watches these videos. Hopefully, this is 16 minutes in, so you may not get to it if you cut the video short. But his birth name was Thomas, so this was the hitchhiker that he met. He's about to give you the breakdown. His birth name was Thomas. His background was as follows. He was born in America to Lebanese parents. They lived for some years in the Midwest and then moved to the East Coast, always according to his father's employment. His father was an engineer in the early American oil industry. When Thomas was in his teens, his family moved to Egypt because his father had taken a lucrative job there. Thomas spent most of the remainder of his life in the Middle East. Most of those years he lived in Alexandria, Egypt, when he became a member of an Alexandrian, where he became a member of an Alexandrian branch of Nasarean Essenes. But he also spent considerable amount of time in Baghdad, a city in Iraq, since that is where the head teacher of that order lived. All right, so that the Nasarean religion was underground in both Egypt and Iraq, as both the Muslims, majority of the population, and the mainstream Christian minority of those countries have for many centuries murdered and persecuted Nasareans. Thomas was in his late teens when he became a student of the Nasarean religion of the Essene Way. Though, for short, we refer to the members of the spiritual order, Thomas, and he's also known as Malachi. This Thomas was just his birth name. And his teacher, Abdul, also known as Abidel, they refer to them as Nasarean Essenes. So they're not just Essenes. You have to say this Nasarean Essenes, because the proper full name is the Nasarean, I like to say the Nasarean, just so you know you're pronouncing, because this is a Hebrew word, Nasa. The Nasareans, the Nasarean religion of the Essene Way. That's the proper full name. The name of the religion is Nasarean because Nasa means to raise up or ascend. The way of the religion is Essene because Essene means healing. So when you say the full name, that's why you always hear me say it, the Nasarean religion of the Essene Way. I always say the Nasarean Bible of the Essene Way because that entire title means the way of the healer to raise you up, to ascend. This is the healing way of ascending, raising up. Okay? So, he says, when I refer to my teacher Thomas in his Nasarean initiatic name, when I refer to my teacher Thomas, his Nasarean initiatic name was Malachi. As having met and studied with the Nasarean Essene, I am talking about. So when he says he's talking about his teacher, Malachi, he's talking about the vegetarian, anti-animal sacrifice religion that worships both God and Goddess, and through them raised both Jesus and the Magdalene, and had their own version of the Bible that was very different than the mainstream Old Testament. That's who these Nasarean Essenes were. Jesus and Mary Magdalene was from that order. And they have a very different Bible. All right, and this is it. This is going to end it. It keeps going, but you guys are going to have to find a book to get this whole story because it's long. Malachi arrived in the United States in the late 1960s, some amount of years after the passing of his teacher, the one they said, Abdul. He carried with him not only the teachings and traditions of the Nasarean religion of the Essene Way, but also copies of ancient Nasarean scrolls. Some he could read, others he could not, and some were written in ancient languages that he had never studied. Malachi was very saintly but not particularly scholarly. He was not capable of translating the scrolls into English himself. That work would be for others to accomplish. That work was given to me at the end of my 7 years of training with him. He was the messenger, the link, the carrier of authorized copies of Nasarean scrolls that had never been translated into English and were completely unknown to mainstream scholarship and the worldly authorities. And they didn't get to America until the late 1960s. So, his story keeps going. He chose to enter America without alerting authorities when he came back home because he was born in America and then his parents sent him when he was a teenager. They moved, remember? So you just heard the whole story. Right, so in the 60s, he brought all of these manuscripts back. Some of them, he couldn't even read them. But that's what David, when he was 17 and he met him, studied for 7 years with him, and then he was given the task of translating those scrolls into English. And this is who did it. The author, Day of Greenleaf. And like around the time he graduated, he was doing all this stuff. This is him in 1983. He getting arrested during an anti-nuclear weapons protest. This is all while he was probably working on the translations. In the 80s, he was still getting arrested. And he says right here, personal note, when the first printing of the Megillah was done in 1997, I composed a note to the reader. I read that at the beginning of the video on the source of this Bible, which I made an effort to preserve my anonymity. However, so many people had already knew that I was the chief translator that it became evident that I could not preserve my anonymity. Even so, I leave that original note at the front of the Megillah because I like it and it contains good general information. All right, and by the time I inserted this personal note, I was in my 60s and wanted to impact the following information. Wanted to impart the following information to everyone that loves this Nasarean Bible and wants to help keep it available and widely circulated, because the completion of this translation has been, for me, essentially a lifetime project. Before leaving this incarnation, I want to do what I can to make sure that the Holy Megillah, Nasarean Bible of the Essene Way, remains and untampered with. A, untampered with. B, always in print. And C, widely circulated. Alright. Alrighty. This was like him as an old man was teaching at this it's in Oregon. I put the address up there before. It's in my notes somewhere or on my community page. Y'all can pause this and read this. This is him. Love and always, always in love. Day the Yair. He looks joyful. I mean, man. And there's more. He has not translated all the scrolls he had. Somewhere in here he says that there's still additions to come. So I don't know. I'm going to get myself to write to them too. But all right. So that was for how we got our hands on these manuscripts. This guy, David Alexander, San Diego. He met Malachi. Right. Thanks for watching. Stay tuned.
Keep it in the family. If we wake up this morning and don't have no tea, if we wake up this morning and don't have
What me do?